Good morning, everyone. How's everybody doing? It is true. The lights are blinding.
Can't see anybody.
Can't see you at all.
So, hi.
You look great, right?
Yes. First off, a big thank you to all of those who are sponsors of this event and helping to make this possible. We're all very appreciative of that and the opportunity for us to come together as a group to discuss topics like this. And I'd love, although we can't see very well, but we're going to try. Can I see a show of hands for those of you in the audience who are vendors?
Well, we got two over here.
Okay, great.
One there.
Excellent. And specifically those involved in design and construction? Okay, pretty much everybody, right? Okay, and then can I see a show of hands of folks who are in hotel operations or development or brand? Okay, so we've got a mix, but we've got quite a few vendors here. And again, thank you. We wouldn't all be doing what we're doing without all of you. And I think that's a good segue as we start our panel discussion. I'm going to reframe sustainability for a moment. And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of the sustainability of our industry. There are 187,000 hotels worldwide. Every single one of those hotels is at risk. And the risk is related to climate change, which none of us at this point can control. But all of us are being affected in one way or another, whether it's directly to the properties that we're owning, operating, providing products for as a result of fires and floods and hurricanes. We're seeing it all, right? Or as a result of supply chain disruption that is providing real challenges when it comes to ultimately getting hotels open, supplied, operated, and ultimately heads and beds. So when we think about sustainability, one of the ways to reframe the conversation is the sustainability and the viability of our industry, which takes all of us working together to solve some really complex problems. But the good news is that we are making real progress in that, and that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about today. The other thing that I want to share just before we jump in is that these challenges are related to carbon emissions. And when you look across the asset classes, the hospitality industry is the asset class in real estate that has the highest amount of energy use. Whether we're talking about the limited service or resorts or full service, it takes a lot of energy to operate the hotels. But interestingly enough, very closely correlated with that is the amount of energy associated with manufacturing. So when you take the two together, it presents a lot of opportunity for all of us to be engaging in initiatives that address that challenge. And that's what we're going to talk about today. The last thing that I'll preface this conversation with is that there is $1.5 trillion in assets under management that are actively investing in hotels worldwide that are specifically seeking out information related to sustainability initiatives, or also called ESG, environmental, social, and governance initiatives. And they're looking for different types of information today than they've looked at historically. And that information set is data and analytics that is substantiating the way in which the money that they're investing in our industry is being allocated to support addressing the challenges that we face, whether those challenges are environmental related or related to social responsibility. So with that, I'm going to start off with a question for Mike, which is related to what's going on when it comes to access to capital and how that's being impacted by this focus on sustainability.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting to look back maybe 10, 15 years ago when people talk about sustainability, we joke that it was the card in the bathroom that told you to put your towels up on the rack if you didn't want your towels to be replaced, and which then kind of morphed into amenities being in bulk and reducing plastic usage in the bathrooms and whatnot. That's sort of the early days of quote sustainability in our business. And what that has evolved toward is from an investor standpoint, looking for practices and ideas that go through the whole life cycle of the asset that are far more intense and so much more scrutiny through from the design process to construction through to operations to the point you just made. It isn't it isn't just operations and reducing water usage and reducing chemical usage. And it's also not just, finding the right materials that are more sustainable, that are going to last longer, they're going to have a lighter impact on the environment. And, I would say maybe 5, 7, 10 years ago, capital would look at those elements as, and maybe it's a differentiator. If you're an asset manager and you're raising money and you're able to go find an operator or an owner who's more innovative, that's an advantage. That's a differentiator. I'm going to be able to raise more money more quickly, or go to investors that maybe haven't been in the space before. Where it's evolved to now, particularly in the last handful of years, as we've seen more visible climate events face us, is that the investors are requiring that you have a plan. And so I think it's gone from maybe more of a niche competitive advantage to a core requirement that if I'm going to invest capital with you, you need to describe to me what it is you're going to do through that entire life cycle. And so, how are you building your how are you building your hotel? How are you renovating it? What does your operator or brand require in terms of sustainable practices going forward? And so I think it's a shift that's obviously it's a positive shift, because there will become a standardization of what once the owners and operators that maybe were reluctant or put that to the back of the bus in terms of their priorities when they were developing or operating assets, are now having to follow the leading edge practices that some of the innovators maybe were looking at 5, 7, 10 years ago. And I think it will lead to a set of standards that the rest of the industry not only can follow, but will have to follow to be relevant and competitive when it comes to raising capital and then maintaining those relationships with important equity investors going forward.
Brad, I'd like to bring you in on this as well. There's a term we're starting to hear, which talks about brown capital, stranded assets, things of that nature, right? When you've got hotels that are not making the commitment and demonstrating that from the standpoint of sustainability. Can you talk about that from the Sage perspective and what you're seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. At Sage, we've always tried to do the right thing, and our mission really is to enrich lives one experience at a time, and that really plays in well when you talk about sustainability and even the broader ESG, if you will, which we'll get into in a few minutes. But hotels, if we go back to like 2010 when we first started doing some of the green program hotels, the LEED certified hotels, that type of thing, and you look at their valuation of those properties over time, as it turns out, they capitalize at higher rates, faster, and so doing these right things does create right results, if you will, at the end of the day. And, one of our examples is the Perry Lane Hotel in Savannah. And it was a ground up development. To get all this done, it's a very collaborative approach. You've got to have the investor, the developer, the brand that's represented, who's operating, so on and so forth. And designers all, kind of working, together. And there, it was the first luxury hotel that was going into a market that was pretty secondary to Charleston, quite frankly. And by doing all of the right things and grounding ourselves in that community and pulling in things like the Savannah College of Art and Design to help execute the entire art program in the hotel, that property, capitalized at a higher rate than, in the middle of the pandemic, by the way, than, any hotel ever had in Savannah. And it continues to, produce those kinds of numbers. And so I think to that point, by incorporating this stuff early on and doing as much as possible, we're seeing actual numbers that show the returns on those assets is higher than other properties.
I hear that question all the time, and as all of us do, right? What's the ROI for this? And I'll just share a couple of data points. So Cushman & Wakefield came out with a study the end of last year. It was with about 60 investors with about 16 billion in assets under management. And the question specifically was, are you seeing an increase in valuation of your assets as a result to, they use the term ESG initiatives? And the answer was not only yes, but the numbers were 4.5% to 7%. That's meaningful. And the interesting data point on this as well, the study was conducted out of the London office of Cushman & Wakefield. About almost 40% of the respondents are those who are headquartered in the US or Americas. So it is a global effort from the standpoint of the folks in the finance world who are looking at this. And it's about the sustainability of their business, of their investments that they're making, and our business as well. One other data point as well is that we did a study on a courtyard by Marriott in Southern California, where it was a standard PIP, and MindClick evaluates the environmental and social impact of products, and we bring forward data and analytics to quantify how those products are in fact supporting environmental and social responsibility. So we created a marketing campaign for the guests to share the story with them. And guests are a big part of all of this as well. And when we did the analysis and the guest satisfaction surveys, we saw a 150% increase in loyalty, retention, affinity for not only the brand, but the property itself, as a direct result of the stories being told about the products that were selected. And what was fascinating in the research was that the guest equated it to quality of service, which we know is a big driver in our industry. And they said, quote, if Marriott is going out of its way to carefully select products that are better for us and better for the environment, we know that we're going to be well taken care of. So, Lori, with that, I'll turn that over to you. If you could share with the audience the initiatives that Marriott has underway and really how you're supporting owners and operators in this journey.
Sure, love to. Good morning. It's really important to us at Marriott, and one of our core values is to serve our world. And being a global company with 8,700 hotels under our care, we know that we can make a difference, and we know that this is an incredibly important journey that we'll all take. We developed a platform called Serve 360, which speaks to serving our world, and one of the pieces of that is to build and design sustainable hotels. And we work with our owners, we work with government, we work with other organizations, we work with third-party certification companies such as JoAnna's to really pull information forward and make that information available to not only our owners but our consultants and make them aware. I think one of our biggest journeys will be teaching and educating our consultants, our owners, as well as all of our vendors, how important this effort is. What we found through our research is that just over 80% of our guests who have given us feedback about this quest have said that they are interested in aligning with companies who have the same values they do. And their values are directly relatable to saving our planet and our sustainable efforts, as well as our social impact efforts.
And the other piece of that, too, is it's affecting the corporate travel buyer decisions as well.
Yes.
Well, actually, that's a really good point. I'm glad you kind of pushed my memory about that. The other thing that I'd like to share is that over 100 of our primary customers have expressed an interest, and over half of that 100 primary customers have expressed a requirement to provide our sustainability plans to them before they will book with our hotels. And that's going to become more and more the case. We also have to answer to now the SEC, it's before the SEC, that there will be sustainability requirements and decarbonization reporting in order to move forward in companies. So I think this is something that's coming. I think, we spoke yesterday that it may come at us in maybe 5 or 10 years as ADA came at us 40 years ago. So I think it's important that we all work together. I think that's the key. We have to work together, the brands, the vendors, the hoteliers, the REITs, the lenders. There isn't anybody who's exempt. The insurance companies, we've seen so many of our hotels damaged by natural disasters. We created a climate action program, which we call CAP, because for any of those of you who know us at Marriott, we can't go forward without an acronym. So our climate action program basically is, us working together internally and externally to develop basically platforms and goals around this to get us to net zero by 2050. And by 2030, we are intent on working with vendors and having 95% of our primary vendors have an emissions program and a sustainability program that is within, an alignment with ours, as well as has been assessed by a third-party certification company.
So that leads us into a good segue if we dive into projects a little bit more in depth and to talk about how this is actually being implemented. Brad, as you were talking about the project in Savannah, Mike, can you talk about your work in St. Louis and Cincinnati and to pull a quote, these projects injected new energy into these cities. And just to underscore something for a moment, when we talk about ESG, the S stands for social responsibility. And I think that there's been a little bit of a misinterpretation of exactly what that is intended to be. It's meant to be a financial metric. And we want to move far beyond just checking the box. And what's interesting is that we're in an industry where when we do come into cities and different settings, hotels have a big impact in terms of the livelihood, in terms of the culture of these locations and so on. So when we think about social responsibility from that standpoint, it goes far beyond checking the box of, are we working with organizations that are certified as sustainable businesses, but more, or social, or women-owned, what have you, but more what is being done in a community partnership that is really helping to turn around communities for the betterment of us all.
Yeah. So in the case of St. Louis, which is a 21C hotel, opened about 2 months ago, it really started for that project started with the building selection, site selection, and looking at a city that we felt needed rejuvenation, needed some significant investment, and that part of town, which once the project was underway, fortunately, the soccer stadium was built 3 blocks away, so there started to be some momentum there. But that part of town needed life, needed energy, needed economic activity, and in that instance, we were able to buy a 180,000 square foot building for about $3 million, and that was the initial advantage from a financial standpoint of taking a little bit more risk on the front end because it's St. Louis in a B location, but being able to acquire something that is very attractive from a financial standpoint. So it started with the site selection, but then quickly we went into the process of deciding what are the systems and the materials that we think are going to last well beyond the typical cycles that we talk about as an industry. And so, when we talk to the consultants, just use MEP as an example, they were sort of shocked to hear us say, no, we actually want to spend more. We want to double down with a system that's not only going to last longer, it's also going to be more efficient. We can prove that it's going to be more efficient, leading to the ROI that Brad mentioned a few minutes ago. So really, we kind of that checklist of going into every consultant and saying this is our goal from a sustainability standpoint. And we didn't, at the time, candidly, we didn't have exact measurements, but we said we want to overinvest so that over time the building's more efficient, and then ultimately we're not spending the same amount in renovation capital 5, 7, 10 years out down the road. And so that was the conversation during the design phase. And then looking kind of to the S of ESG, looking at how we were going to operate that hotel, and then the other projects that we've done in the same strategy, same philosophy, was looking at employment and looking at procurement in innovative ways that maybe hoteliers haven't looked at in the past. And so, in every city we partnered with a local community college to develop a hospitality development program that could feed students into not only our building but other buildings in the community. We partnered with other employment agencies that had not been in the hospitality business in the past. And when we have such a challenge with employment these days, if you're hiring 120 people and you're creating a pipeline of 30 that didn't exist before, that's a massive advantage over the competition. And then, what we found with that is if we're doubling down in the community, doing things that others haven't done, the loyalty, you mentioned earlier, of like the stickiness of the customer, because you're doing certain practices. It's the same with the employees and what you're doing to build loyalty and excitement around the building. And when the community sees you do things in an innovative fashion, not only do your employees stick around longer, but their families and others in the community are seeing what you're doing, and they're more interested in supporting your business. And so that's really the philosophy on the employment side. And the last piece from a social standpoint was procurement. And it's so much easier to find coffee, toilet paper, steak, chicken, whatever it might be, in a more sustainable fashion. And so, our strategy was to buy at least 80% of all the supplies within an hour of the building, and which is not easy in some locations, but it gave the team a really aggressive target and a focus that we're not just buying the cheapest thing that's going to come over from China. We're going to look local, and ultimately, that strategy also engenders loyalty and excitement around the building. You have social media, you have the ability to communicate to your customers and your team and the community what you're doing locally. The last piece, and then I'll shut up, was that we really thought was critical to the ongoing operation of the building, was to employ a director of social impact of the property. And that was a dedicated role that focused on everything that I just talked about. And so someone who's engaging with employment agencies, with vendors, with community organizations who need to be supported in that neighborhood, that person is really the glue that brings all that together.
It's an absolutely fascinating model, and the data scientist in me is going, I want to see the numbers. How did you guys compare? Do you have that relative to other properties in the area?
Yeah. So in each case, what we looked at, we developed a dashboard. What we looked at was employee retention. We looked at with a survey. We talked to the employees, asked them about their engagement or their interest in working in this building because of the practices, and there was a overwhelming level of support behind what the business was about, and knowledge. And I think a big piece of it is communicating. What do the employees understand? Do the vendors understand this is what the business is about? And when the employees understood the mission, there's more buy-in. They felt like they were part of the mission, the strategy, because they could have a voice and bring ideas to the table. We were in the early days of figuring out from a energy standpoint, like what's the baseline. That's really I think the most challenging thing is figuring out what's sort of normal or maybe not ideal, and then how do you start to ratchet back from there. I think that requires a lot more study and a lot more science from probably folks like you in the audience, to ensure that we're we're exceeding what the industry is typically doing.
I love these case study examples because it makes it so much more real. And just to, again, bring some data into all this, and to talk about the role that the products play inside of the spaces that our guests are in. A number of years ago, when LEED first came out, one of the banking giants was one of the first to adopt LEED, and they're big enough that they run, employee satisfaction surveys ongoing, and just like in the hospitality industry, turnover in banking, retail banking, is very, very high. And one of the things they discovered in their typical surveys was two things. This particular location had very low turnover numbers compared to everywhere else in the country. And secondly, the employee satisfaction scores were just through the roof. And the group doing the research had no idea that the space had been renovated with a focus on choosing products that supported better indoor air quality and design that brought more light into the space and things that tie into part of the experience related to sustainability. So when they dug in to understand why was this particular retail banking site doing so much better, they discovered that it really had to do with the design of the space. And the ramifications of that were, not only do you have less cost associated with recruiting and hiring and training new employees, but their customer satisfaction scores were higher too. So Lori, turning it over to you, you're in a very key role with respect to Marriott brand standards and the selection of the design concepts and the products that go into so many of Marriott hotels. Can you talk about your team's approach to selection of products in a way that are supporting not only the health and well-being of our employees, but also guests, and then of course the impact from a planet standpoint?
Sure, thanks. Our guests are obviously our best commodity. It's really our only commodity, and I think we forget sometimes as designers that it's really about heads in beds. It's really not necessarily about the design. But where the design comes in is providing that guest experience and the guest satisfaction. So what we've been working toward, in addition to working with our vendor base and having them have the same goals in ESG as we do, we've also been looking at different ways of design. And the one thing that has become really important to us at Marriott is to be more simple about the way we do things, that it doesn't necessarily have to be complicated. And the more complicated, the less of a good result that we get. So we've been looking at things like less underground excavation work. We've been looking at smaller footprints, being able to accomplish the same programming in a smaller footprint, because as you know, square footage equates to not only cost, but also greenhouse gas emissions. So we've been looking at that from an architectural and interior architecture standpoint as well. And as you mentioned, JoAnna, bringing more daylight in and allowing for less of the systems to be used. And also guest room management systems, we are now requiring that in all of our brands to control the use of power and electricity. And from an FF&E standpoint, we're looking to vendors to come up with really creative ways to source new materials that don't necessarily incorporate, and this is in the built environment as well as FF&E, concrete, steel, aluminum, and glass, which emit more CO2 than certainly fabrics and carpets and things like that. As you know, we went to LVT in most of our brands a long time ago now, which obviously alleviates removal of carpet, having it recycled or going to a landfill, and also amidst cleaning that carpet twice a year and saving water and chemicals and things like that. So we're looking at those sorts of things. The other thing that we're looking at quite seriously are fabrics that are being introduced that are biodegradable once you put them into a landfill or put them into the circularity system. We're looking at products that have circularity. And one of the only ways that we can understand this is with the help of our vendors and working with them, and also the vendors working with companies that can assess how their products fare in sustainability. And that is key for us right now. We are looking to those partnerships to establish much longer life cycles as well as circular life cycles. So I think, did I answer your question? Or I could go on for a really long time, but
Yeah.
I don't want to make everybody tired of
Out there.
the topic. So
Still out there.
are you still out there? Are you there?
Well, it's a good segue over to you, Brad. As you think about, you've held a lot of roles in your career in the industry, and one of the questions that I get, and maybe you get as well, is, all right, here we go again. Another fad, another, ESG is the latest terminology for all of this. Is this here to stay? Yeah. And then how is that affecting how an organization like Sage is really approaching the business of hotels?
Thank you. It's interesting. I've been directly involved in putting together initially what was going to be a strategy, and now is really more of a plan and a report on an annual basis on ESG. And so on the environmental side, we look at our, the buildings that we operate, and about 60% of the reduction of your footprint or net zero is the operations, quite frankly. And so there's a lot of things that are in place and continuing to do all the time. And then 40% is the building. And so on that side, when you look at renovations, you chunk out what you can, each project. On new construction, we're trying to figure out exactly how we get a hotel built by 2030 that is net zero. And I would tell you we're somewhere between 66 to 75% of understanding what's going to have to happen in order to get us, to that point when we start construction on those buildings. But there's still, 25 to 30% of the project that it's really kind of foggy and still has to be worked out. So each of these things are like that. So on the operations side, on sustainability, there are the elephants in the room, I call them sometimes, the single-use plastics and getting rid of them in all of your buildings. And so we're converting most of our hotels to hydration stations with glass bottles that are refillable, that type of thing. We have found a partner, and it does take partnerships and collaborative efforts, but a partner, a startup company out of New Hampshire that can do a full circular food waste. I mean, it's easy to say, everybody compost. Well, it's, depending where you are, you can get it done, you can't get it done, it's all over the board. So we have found a partner that is proving to us right now in 5 hotels that they can take all of your food waste, they break it down with biochemicals and convert it to organic fertilizer or organic soils. And that comes back to the community, to community gardens. Customers, get bags of it when they've had events at the hotels, and so there are these things that are going to move us forward, much faster. And so, by 2030, we expect to have the operations, fully carbon neutral. The buildings will come, behind that a little bit. But then you go to the social side of things, and yes, it's here to stay because, listen, our world, we have to take care of each other. It's a right thing to do. Diversity, equity, inclusion, is part of that and has been, a major focus, for several years now, and will continue to be as we go forward. And then on the governance side, an organization like ours is a private company, but does have a board. And so there are governance issues that affect the whole company that now, we want all the associates to have exposure to. And so full transparency on, exactly, what's going on. And with that, you get the kind of buy-in that, extends somebody's, career with an individual company. And so I think all three of those elements are really important. It's the right thing to do. We've heard earlier that customers are requiring it. There's no question about it. We have owners. Most of your publicly traded REITs are kind of all in. That it's required by them, and so we're having to show them our results, our reports, on an annual basis. So yes, I think it's here to stay.
So I just want to underscore that a little bit further with, again, pulling in some data and all of this. And so when it comes to financial reporting, there's guidelines and a framework that everybody follows. It's called the Financial Accounting Standards Board. And maybe about 8 to 10 years ago, SASB was created, the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, and it has since merged with another global entity that, in essence, is writing the rules for what is financial reporting. And ESG is actually a financial metric. And this is what is part of the knowledge sharing that needs to happen. And once you start measuring something from a financial performance standpoint, let me tell you, it's here to stay. Mm-hmm. And that's what's driving all of this, right? Whether it's access to capital, whether it's the selection of what brands to choose based on the performance of the brand standard, whether it's asset valuation when it's time to sell that hotel, and whether it's the selection of vendors that organizations like those on the stage are choosing to contract with and to purchase from. And 80% of carbon emissions are in the supply chain. So whether you're talking about operational carbon emissions, whether you're talking about your design and construction, it all comes down to what suppliers can do in a couple of key ways. One of it is how are your products supporting hotels operating in ways that are more efficient? So reducing the amount of energy required, reducing the amount of waste, conserving water. Those are the basics, right? Those are just table stakes. And then the other is what you're doing in your own operations, also known as Scope 3 emissions. So it's what's happening in the ways in which you are manufacturing products and how much energy it takes to do so, and efforts being made to access renewable energy, to be more efficient in your manufacturing, in your distribution practices, even in thinking about things like packaging, right? On average, every product uses 30% more packaging than it needs. If we just start to do the math on that and the impact in terms of how many more carriers there are on the road to transport products that are using 30% excess material, even to create that material in the first place, and then the hotels have to handle that material. And while we hope that all of it is set up so it can be fully recycled, we know that whether plastic is being used as part of it or other materials that can't go into the recycling stream, it means almost all of it isn't going to the recycling stream because there's a lot of handling that has to happen to separate materials. So the opportunity for innovation is huge. And those suppliers who are understanding this and really, and I think you heard this a couple times in the last few days, which is, approaching the folks on the stage in a partnership, in a collaboration way to say, how can we help you solve the real challenges that you face? And the amount of emissions that come from your manufacturing dwarfs the amount of emissions that come from what it takes to operate hotels. So there's a great opportunity for our industry. The more that you're making an impact and reducing your footprint, the more that helps these hoteliers, the brands, be able to tell their story as well. So,
JoAnna, I think that so much attention, even at Marriott as well, has been placed on the operations piece as well as the energy piece. The energy piece is really big, and so is operations. However, the one thing I just want to stress is that from a design standpoint, I think designers don't understand the influence that they can have. In Marriott, we have 32 brands. I think it's 32.
Today.
Could be 33.
This morning.
Did we? Did we really? Oh my gosh, I'm always the last to know. But so 32 brands, and out of those brands, we have about 14 prototypical brands, or that have some form of prototype to them, a guest room prototype or what have you. The rest of the brands are all dedicated to custom design. We've partnered with JoAnna's firm, and we've had all of those prototypes assessed. And some of them are better than others. I won't, veil the truth. We have some wellness brands, and they do fairly well, no pun intended. And we have our full-service brands that do okay. Our Moxie brand actually does very well, which is surprising. Not because it's our kind of fun hunter millennial brand, but it does well from the standpoint of, we worked on a pilot program with JoAnna's firm and with Baskerville Design out of Richmond, and to do our Moxie Virginia Beach. And the assessment came back better when Baskerville did the work and did the design and their sensitivity to ESG. It came back better than what our prototype was, which was really exciting. But what's important about what I'm going to tell you is that it's important for your design firms and your vendors to understand that when a designer begins, and they begin with a concept narrative, and they begin to look for product, we need to educate those designers to go to the sustainable product first. The sustainable product that will cover the most square footage first. The throw pillows we really don't care about, okay? Those may not be too sustainable. But the vinyl wall coverings, the paint, the floor coverings, the lighting, all of those things are so critical to our efforts in sustainability. And if we don't train our design firms or work with design firms, which brings me to my next topic, is that at Marriott, we have a recommended designer program. We vet all of these designers to work with our brands. Part of vetting them is having an understanding of what their targets are and what their goals are in sustainability and social and governance. So by understanding that and aligning, then we hope to show that alignment with our guests. And eventually, I think all hoteliers need to shout it from the rooftops. We don't do enough of that. We need to be able to show that we are sustainable, or show that we have a dedication to ESG through our own website, our own Marriott Bonvoy website, through Expedia, through Booking.com, through how do we get the word out to our potential guests to say, we've done the legwork, we've done the heavy lifting, come and stay with us because we believe what you believe.
Just one quick kind of do-over. Is it here, is ESG here to stay? We need to learn from the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Europe, you look at Southeast Asia, New Zealand, Australia, go on, and they for different reasons. In Europe, the scarcity environment they have forced them to do things, differently and take care of their countries, communities differently. But there's a lot to be learned there. And so I think it's very important that we pay attention to that and we act accordingly and do the right things to, again, get those right results.
Right.
So I know we don't have that much more time left, but I would love for Mike, you and Brad to both give some more examples and talk further about the project work that you've done. And one of the things, of course, is we talk about access to capital, but also what's happening with respect to access to local community dollars or public-private partnerships and ways that perhaps the audience can learn from what you turn to help support the initiatives the specific hotel projects that fall under this umbrella.
Yeah, I think the thing I would point to is when with the historic adaptive reuse projects that I've been involved with and Brad and Sage have done in the past, they're extremely difficult to make pencil. When you look at the potential unknowns, the surprises you have along the way of renovating a historic building or building really a brand new hotel within a historic building, the risks are significant. And that necessitates almost always some sort of public-private partnership or some support from the city or state or other public agencies who could participate, provide some financial support or subsidies for those projects. And what my experience has showed me is that when we've been very upfront, very proactive, communicating the goals of the project and some of the track record that we built in positively impacting the communities, the public agencies that we worked with became so much easier to deal with. And you think about going into a city council meeting, and as a developer, you're always prepared for the message of, okay, you're a private development firm, you work for high net worth family, or whatever the case may be. Why do we need to support this project? Mm-hmm. And what we found was that disarming those groups, those individuals, and explaining to them there's a larger mission, but there's a very comprehensive approach to positively impacting the community. Without exception, they got behind the project and kind of went out of their way to support and be flexible and kind of bend over backwards whenever we needed them to go the extra mile from a subsidy standpoint. So that to me, that wasn't not necessarily a surprise, but to go into those environments and to be able to really forge a partnership with agencies that potentially could be more difficult to work with was a real product of the work that we were doing. The other thing I would add, this is a little bit tangential to your question, JoAnna, but the other thing I'd add that has been touched on a little bit is we as an industry, and this goes from, I think, the vendor side to the owner, operator, or brand side of things. I think we've been pretty slow in communicating our work well. Mm-hmm. So the example you used earlier, of being proactive and telling the guests, this is what this courtyard is about. These are the things that we're doing. From my seat, there's always this hesitancy of being too preachy, or you walk that fine line of, my building is holier than thou, and we're doing everything perfectly. But the fact of the matter is, the guest wants to understand as they check in. You don't need to hit them across the face, but they want to understand when they check in, this is what this building's about. And when they look at the menu, where do the products come from? When they're in their room, maybe there's some subtle information as to what's going on in that room that's more sustainable than another hotel room. And then for the vendors in the room, I would ask the same thing, like proactively communicate to like us as a development community. What are you doing? What's a new idea, or what's a change that you've implemented in your business? Because we're all just now figuring out what the reporting of all of this looks like. And the more information we're armed with, the better decisions we can make on the next project. So I just say, don't be shy about what are those practices? What have you tried and succeeded with? What have you tried and failed with? And be open, be communicative, and talk to the development community. Because then if we're seeing that you all are taking risk or being creative or making this a priority, you're immediately to the top of the list as a vendor.
That's such an excellent point. I think we heard yesterday about the the notion of immersive experiences. And this whole subject area really fits into that because we're about story, right? And, when we talk about more shift towards a local feel, a local design of a hotel, there's a sustainability story in that too, right? When we talk about kind of romancing the guest, your products have a story behind them. And it's no disrespect meant, but not many consumers really understand what it means to have a LEED rating, right? Or to have some of these ratings or certifications out there, right? That's not going to get heads in beds. What is going to get heads in beds is a story that makes people feel good. So if you can talk about, and I use this analogy because it comes to me quickly, right? But which is the carpet is made from discarded fishing nets coming from the coast of Malaysian villages where you're cleaning up the pollution and you're providing an economy. That makes you feel good, right? And we heard outright, in the research that we did, guests saying, look, I don't really like to be using a damp towel from the night before, right? Okay, I'll hang up my towel, but it's not so great, right? And decline housekeeping, you're taking away a service. And although people understand that, there's a sustainability impact, on the flip side of it is, well, whose job did you take away? And guests are aware of that, right? So the more that can be shared in terms of thoughtful decisions of the materials, the design of a hotel, the experience they're having, consumers relate to these products because they're in our homes too, right? So I think that, to your point, we've really missed, and I know that you guys have a restaurant group, right? I mean, the whole farm to table movement,
Yep.
The menu romanced the farm to table movement. There was, in some restaurants, they were great about even talking about things like why they made the decision to use a hand dryer versus hand towels, all under this, clear positioning of we are all in when it comes to sustainability. And we have the same opportunity to do this in our industry, and the booking engines are looking for it. Everybody's looking for the content and the story. And that comes, to your point, from communication that's occurring between what is happening in the supply chain, what is happening at the hotels themselves, and really bringing that to light. So thank you for making that point.
I think they make a good point of it here, too. If you read your door hanger, if you put your door hanger out on the outside of your door, one of them said, put it out by 2 a.m. and that will refuse housekeeping, and they will donate a meal to someone who is in need, which I thought was brilliant, just brilliant. And
Yeah.
those are the types of things that we need to support and talk about.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there's an example that came from another conference I was just at where there's a dial in the shower that showed how much water was being used and how much energy was being used by the duration of the shower and the heat being used. And think about this as a guest. You're sitting there, and that meter is telling you whether you're below average, higher than average, right? And someone on the panel said, now what if that was associated with Marriott Bonvoy points, which is, if you're keeping below a certain number, you get extra points. I mean, there's some opportunity here to do some gamification of all of this and really partner with our guests in ways that address the challenges that we all face. So just checking on time. I think we've got some time for a few questions. Am I good?
So I was going to say we do have some roundtables scheduled afterwards, and JoAnna has generously offered to lead one of them. So if you guys have more follow-up questions for her to really dig deep into some of these issues, I think we can do that, if that makes sense. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for coming here, for joining us, and for sharing all of these insights. I hope you guys got a lot out of it.